So in the video assisted scale transfer course, we have it on refractive procedures, and we have 5 speakers with us who would be covering from PRK to refractive lens exchange. So everything from scratch to the most advanced SMILE procedure, and everything that is being practiced now would be covered. With me, I am Dr. Ashok Kumar Nanda from Bhubaneswar. We have Dr. Rushad Shroff from New Delhi, Dr. R.K. Bansal from Chandigarh, Dr. Ajay Pal from Calcutta, and Dr. Sonu Goel from Rajasthan. So now I invite Dr. Rushad Shroff to speak on flap creation by femto and its complications. Dr. Shroff. तीन नंबर स्विच करो.
So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this vast course. I'm going to be talking on femto-LASIK and its complications. I have no financial disclosures to make related to this presentation. So we'll just start off with a couple of videos of the femto-LASIK. I have access currently to the IntraLase device, the IntraLase 150. This is the typical femto. I'll come to the mechanics of the flap. But following the femto part, then the excimer is performed the normal way. What you have to be aware of in a femto flap is that it's a little more sticky than the microkeratome flap, so lifting it is a little bit more challenging. This is the other machine which is mainly in vogue these days, which is the FS200 from Wavelight. As you can see, the way the flap is created is slightly different. There's a canal instead of a pocket in this, and I'll just come to that in the subsequent slides and explain why that's important. So the flap lift, generally what we've seen in our experience is that the Wavelight's flap lift is a little bit smoother and less sticky compared to the IntraLase system. So this is the basic diagram of the flap. You can see that there's a side cut, a flap bed, a hinge, and a pocket. And in the FS200, instead of the pocket, there's a canal. Basically, these two serve as a venting mechanism for gas bubbles to escape, so as to reduce the OBL or the opaque bubble layer, which inhibits the lifting of the flap. So this is just a photograph of the settings we normally keep on our device. The depth can be anywhere between 90 to 120 microns. The diameter of the flap is generally kept at about 9 millimeters. The bed energy, generally you have to play around with that and calibrate it so that the flap lift is easy. The side cut angle, I will come to in the subsequent slides. It's greater than 90 degrees, and the hinge angle is between 45 and 55. So why do we keep these settings? The pocket, as I said, allows egress of air. It reduces the OBL, and generally the pocket, what we have to remember, is at a depth of 220 to 250 microns. It's a little bit deeper than the flap. That's because we want the bubbles to escape into the deeper layers of the cornea, which the collagen is not as tightly packed in. The hinge angle is about 55 degrees, between 45 and 55. The reason for that is the narrower the hinge angle, the greater the area that is exposed, but you can't make the hinge angle too narrow, otherwise when you reposit the flap, there's a chance of flap striae. So we'll go to the complications later, and I'll show you what happens there. The flap diameter commonly, like I said, is 9 millimeters. The side cut angle, inverted side cuts are more in vogue. That means greater than 90 degrees because literature says that there's less dry eye and better stability of the flap when you do a slightly higher than 90 degree side cut angle. There are various different femto devices, like I mentioned, available in the market. These are tables just highlighting the differences between them. Broadly, I've highlighted the key factors in these devices. The Wavelight has the fastest creation of the flap, as it's a 200 kilohertz laser. The Femto LDV is the narrowest footprint, so it's more mobile compared to the other devices. The intralaser suction is not inbuilt; it's with a syringe, so that's one thing which the other machines do a little bit better. The applanation surface is generally planar except for the Visumax. I think Dr. Sonu will talk about that later. And then the costing is different in the different devices. And the constant temperature and humidity requirements are there for the intralase and the wavelight. Coming to complications, I've divided them into intraoperative and postoperative complications. So we'll go through the intraoperative ones first. The first one that I'd like to show this video of is a suction loss, which occurs. It can occur. The vacuum built up by the laser is not as strong as by the microkeratome. It doesn't reach as a higher vacuum level, so you can have this kind of suction loss during the raster pass. It's important to remember that the handling of the suction loss is different if it happens during the raster or during the side cut. If it happens during the raster, you can just redock, switch off the pocket setting because you've already made the pocket, and then go ahead because generally your applanation is fairly good and fairly consistent, and then you can just reposit the flap in a normal way. If you have a suction loss during the side cut, what you need to do is again redock but make a deeper and a narrower flap, basically so that you do not have two planes and you do not have difficulty lifting. This is one where there was a mild movement of the patient during the procedure, which is why the flap was uncut in one area and we had to use a crescent to actually to fashion that part of the flap so that we could lift it. So if this thing happens in the periphery, it's okay, it's safe to lift it, but try to dissect with blunt instruments. That's the take home to take from this. So factors for suction loss: flat corneas, deep set eyes, narrow palpebral fissures, lid squeezing or a change in the patient position. As I said, suction loss during the raster, just redock and switch off the pocket. Whereas during the side cut, you have to redock and make a smaller flap so that you don't end up with two planes. Coming to the next complication, which was a folded flap, as we can see here. The flap edge has inverted, and now there's epithelium that's grown into that particular area. So you actually need to debride the epithelium from there. The reason is that if you just lift this flap and put it over that, the epithelium will be under the flap, and that can lead to epithelial ingrowth and further problems. What we need to do is to carefully lift the flap after hydration of it, then try and if we are seeing any striae, try to deposit it, pull it in two separate directions with the Meroseal sponge, remove the epithelium because that's a very important factor that tethers the flap striae in place. So if you want to remove flap striae, it's always important to look at the epithelium. If it's immediately post-op, you can get away without removing it, but most of the time it is advisable to remove the epithelium for managing flap striae or folded flap. Here we can see macro striae which are coming into the visual axis. So this is significant. The patient is going to definitely have visual complaints because of this. Again, it's important to carefully go and lift this flap. We can see that we are going under the flap, just carefully repositing it. And again, here you would want to remove all the epithelium that is on the bed which has grown in because the flap has moved away from its position. The gutter would be infiltrated by epithelium. So first you remove that, do a thorough wash, make sure that there are no epithelial cells underneath. Then here we first attempted to reduce the flap striae without removing the epithelium, but then subsequently realized that they're going to be quite tightly anchored, and then removed the epithelium and did the reposition of the flap after that, after floating it with BSS. So managing flap striae, macro striae are due to misaligned flaps, and these are usually visually significant. Dryness is a very common cause, as is squeezing eyes. The management involves, as I showed in the videos, gently stroking the flap, lifting and repositioning it. It's important to remove the epithelium, as I mentioned, and the prevention, as we say, is the best cure. Marking the flap first hand may be a better idea so that you'll get a good idea whether the flap is back in its original place or not. Flap tears, well, not very common with femtosec with recently, but thinner flaps are at higher risk for flap tears. That means anything less than 100 microns, 90 microns flaps. As the femto flap is a little bit more difficult to lift, you can have a flap tear. If it's in the periphery, there's again no problem. You can continue with your procedure. A larger flap tear involving the pupillary axis, it's important to abandon the procedure, reposition the flap, and then shift to a surface ablation at a later date. This is a video of what is called a vertical gas breakthrough, which is the equivalent of a buttonholing that we get in microkeratome LASIK. You can see that dark area in the center, and then suddenly it vents and the air bubble comes out through the Bowman's and the epithelium. So why does this happen? Because cavitation bubbles dissect through the Bowman's layer and epithelium, and a buttonhole is created with a deep black appearance. The risk factors for this are a thin flap. So usually in my LASIK practice, most of the time I try to convince patients for femto LASIK, except when they have a corneal scar or radial keratotomy, because these are at higher risk for vertical gas breakthrough. The management is generally, if you have a complete vertical gas breakthrough, abort the procedure and defer for surface ablation at a later date. Do not lift the flap, otherwise you can cause major issues in these flaps, irregularities, scarring. You can have a whole gamut of problems because of that. A partial buttonhole will be seen when you don't get that dark area. The bubbles stop beneath the Bowman's membrane and it's a whitish appearance. In literature, it is said that you can continue safely in a partial buttonholing, partial vertical gas breakthrough. However, I don't personally have any experience with this. Other common side effects like DLK, that's common to both the microkeratome and the FS LASIK. There are different stages of DLK, the stage 1 where it's in the periphery, stage 2 where it goes towards the center, stage 3 where it causes significant drop in vision, and stage 4 where you have a melting or a thinning of the flap over it. Topical steroids and oral steroids are the treatments for stage 3 relift and wash. Coming to the next complication, this is a peripheral ulcerative keratitis. This was a patient who actually had a femtoLASIK, presented the next day in the morning, was completely normal, but came in at 3 p.m. with this kind of picture. Now, at first glance, I thought this was an infective keratitis, so I started the patient on vancomycin and amikacin and continued the lubricants. And to my horror, the next day I saw in the left eye the same thing appearing, despite having initially given the patient steroids, then stopped them, and then shifted over to antibiotics. This was the slit image. We could see an area of DLK and infiltrate. I went through literature, consulted with a couple of my professors at Narayan Netralaya, and they said that because it was proceeding around the flap margin and not extending centrally, it was more likely to be an immune cause rather than an infection. And so I started steroids again with trepidation, but gradually the patient improved. This is the final picture at day 15, where the patient is much better. And possible causes for this, basically it's trapping of the antigens under the contact lens, which leads to an inhibition of the cyclooxygenase pathway, collection of leukotrienes, and therefore this can cause this problem. Couple of slides. Central toxic keratopathy, important to diagnose, because what we have to remember is it's a central opacity. It looks a little bit by DLK, but lifting the flap and steroids doesn't work. These tend to resolve spontaneously in 2 to 18 months, though there is a hyperopic shift, so you have to counsel the patient carefully regarding this. Rainbow glare is again a complication peculiar to femtoLASIK, mostly seen if the femto is done but the excimer is aborted for some reason. And generally it does settle down with time, but surface ablation following a treatment of the surface may be needed. Epithelial ingrowth again is common to both, so I'll let my subsequent speakers take over the talk on that. Transient photophobia is again because of insult to the ciliary body and inflammation. The lower energy reduces incidence, so again that's why it's important to optimize your bed settings, and treatment is with topical steroids. PISC is another peculiar complication where there's a steroid response and an increased IOP. As you can see in the OCT, there's a fluid collection in the interface with the diffuse haziness, and the treatment is to stop steroids and start anti-glaucoma medications. Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge all my people who contributed videos and helped me make this presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Question answer बाद में? Okay. So I'll be talking about the flap creation and complications by microkeratome. Well, we know the different type of refractory surgeries which are available, the PRK, and we are going to talk about it, LASIK and its modifications, and SMILE. If we look at the flap-based refractory surgeries, then we have the LASIK and other modifications like LASIK, where you just remove the epithelium and do the laser. Then epi-LASIK is mostly not done these days. Then I will be talking about the flap creation. Dr. Shroff already talked about the femtosecond-based creation of the flap for the laser. I will talk about the microkeratome. So I will be showing you the video. So this is a Moria microkeratome. So where before we start creating the flap, we need to look at the machine. We have to check that all the parameters in the machine are working in a proper manner. Otherwise, we'll end up having a loss of the vacuum and then flap problems. So the checking of both the pumps is very, very important, so that we know that machine is working very properly, because ultimately the creation of the flap is based on the proper functioning of the machine. So it has two pumps. So alternative pump is available, so we can check for the pump 1 as well as for the pump 2. So once the machine has been checked that it's working properly, we go for the ring sizes. So ring sizes can be based on the keratometry values and also based on the astigmatism. So based on the astigmatism and all, we can choose a ring size. So once the ring size has been finalized, we need to fix the blade onto this as well as the vacuum tubing onto this. So this is a blade, microkeratome blade, which is used. Different thickness blades are available, like 90 microns and 130 microns. Mostly we are using 90 micron blade. And once the blade has been fixed, again we need to check at the vacuum buildup in the machine. So if we are sure that vacuum is going up to the desired level, then only we go on to the patient and fix the ring size onto the patient side. And also we check the movement of the microkeratome before fixing it onto the patient. So we can see that the microkeratome is working properly. It's going forward as well as it's coming backward. So now we can go on to the patient. So once the patient is there, we need to drape the patient. We have to take care that eyelashes are properly covered so that they don't come in the way of the microkeratome. दोबारा चलाना फुल वीडियो came or not? अच्छा. So anyway, that was about the creation of the flap. So I'll talk about the complications. A lot of complications are already talked about by Dr. Shroff. So I'll be talking about the complications of the LASIK and its management. No financial disclosures. I think we can omit that. This is a perfectly done LASIK eye without any complications. Very nice cornea, shining without any stria and complications. So the complications related to the microkeratome we can divide into three. One is a flap related complications, then complications related to the interface, and then related to the stromal bed. Flap related complications are one of the most common complications we face in microkeratome based LASIK. So as already discussed, can be incomplete flap. There could be a free cap, means the flap totally dislodges from the bed, thin or a buttonholing of the flap. There could be flap stria during the post-operative period, or dislocated flap, means the flap gets a little dislodged from its place, and then we can see folds in the flap and epithelial defects. The incidence of microstria post-operatively is around 3 to 4%. Minor stria usually don't need any treatment but can be managed. And then flap displacement can occur during the post-operative period if the patient accidentally rubs the eye, or there is a minor trauma, or sometime if the selection of the ring size is not proper, one may end up having a free cap, means the epithelial flap, the flap dislodges totally from the bed. So as far as the management of this complication is concerned, if it is an incomplete flap, one can do manual dissection If it is a little bit, if it is somewhere midway or beyond, then it's possible to manually dissect the flap and carry on with the laser. But if it is a somewhere midway, then it's better to wait for 2 to 3 months and then do the resurgery with a thicker flap, or to go for a surface ablation. If it's a free cap, then deposit it back with the proper alignment, but there is need to put a BCL for 2 to 3 days, and sometime rarely a suturing of the flap may be required, so that flap is not lost during the postoperative period. Thin and buttonhole flaps, one need to sometimes abandon if there is a hole in the flap, and then reschedule the surgery after about 3 to 4 months, or go for a surface ablation. Dislodged flaps, one can replace it back, remove the epithelium if it has grown under the flap, and then put it back with a BCL. Some of the complications which will affect the interface of the eye, like epithelial ingrowth, is a major complications. Sometimes small deposits of lint, blood, lipids can be seen, but they usually don't cause any problem unless there is some infiltration along these. Then there is need to clear these foreign bodies from under the flap and then deposit the flap back. The other complication which has been discussed is a DLK, that's a deep lamellar keratitis. Sands of Sahara sometimes can be seen in new patients. Microbial keratitis, again, it's a very rare complication. There's a patient who showed epithelial ingrowth, but it was just up to the margin only, and we did not do anything, and they cleared over a period of 2 to 3 months. Sometimes a small blood, especially if a patient has been using contact lenses, some bleeding can occur the edges and then can be lodged under the flap. Usually it will clear over a period of week to 10 days and doesn't need much treatment. So deep lamellar keratitis, we know it's a little dreaded complication, also called Sands of Sahara. It's a sterile complication, inflammatory complication, usually occurs because of the allergy or toxic reaction, and treatment of this is mainly steroids. Then coming to some of the complications which occurred in the stromal bed, which can lead to undercorrection and overcorrection of the refractory error, or sometimes there could be a decentered ablation leading to high order abrasions or post-LASIK ectasia. This is again a very serious complication, but occurs in less than 1% of the cases, 1 in 1,000 cases. So there is one patient who had a post-LASIK ectasia, and we managed this patient by cross-linking. So management, undercorrection, overcorrections, one can go ahead with the retreatment, which can be done after about a period of 6 weeks to 3 months. Or if the patient is willing to use contact lenses, they can be advised to use contact lenses. Ectasia, as I said, is a rare complication. There are so many causes for it, so we need to screen all these patients properly before we do LASIK. And it's more common if we are keeping the stromal bed less than 250 microns. And if the biomechanics of the cornea are weak, then there are chances that patient may end up having a post-LASIK ectasia. Dry eye again does occur in patients who are exposed to any kind of a flap making, whether it's a fumato or it's a microkeratome based, but usually patient will recover over a period of 5 to 6 months. The 18-year data on the LASIK has shown that this is a quite safe procedure. The overall complication rate in all the patients, they have analyzed about 53,000 cases, and they saw the overall complication rate is less than 1%. 99% of the patients are going to achieve 25/40 or better visual acuity. Some difference between the flap which we create with the fumato and the microkeratome. So if we see that the postoperative flap complications are little high with the microkeratome, around 12.3%, compared to the post-op flap with the fumatosecond, where it's around 8 to 9%. Then another complication which occurs more commonly with the fumatosecond is a DLK, which occurs in about 10% of the cases, whereas with microkeratome occurs in about 6% of the cases. Some of the other complications are almost same in both the patients, whether we do a microkeratome or a fumatosecond base. So LASIK is not only one of the most common surgical procedures performed, it's also one of the most successful surgical procedure. So LASIK surgery performed with the microkeratome, it's a safe, effective and predictable surgery. There are few complications which can be managed appropriately with good visual outcome in these patients. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bansal and Dr. Rushad. Actually, I couldn't thank you because of the mic not working that time. Both of you have covered flap creation and flap related complications very nicely. I think by the time I prepare my topic, we can have some discussion on flap related issues.
Yeah, Dr. Rushil and both of you, since we'll be covering it, that he will be talking on the surface, I'll be going inside lens, and then Dr. Sonu will be talking on the lenticule-based procedure and the phakic IOL. Just wanted to say, I mean, since it is a video-assisted skill transfer, I mean, what would you do, both of you, I mean, it's for one by one. You have a suction loss. I mean, how do you, as a microkeratom-based surgeon and as a femto-based surgeon?
So I showed the videos of the
Yeah.
femto. Basically, you have to determine whether the suction loss is happening during the raster pass or during the side cut. If it's the raster, all you need to do is switch off the pocket setting or the canal if you have the FS200 and redock at the same level. Most of the time it would go to the same level.
Yeah, what are the chances that you will not go to the same level? And I mean, have you had that program and problems? And
Not had that problem.
because
with
I
the-
know the FS2s are very strong. I mean, there is a rare incidence that you.
So in case of that, just redock and then proceed with your flap lift the same way. If it is during the side cut angle, then it becomes an entirely different ball game, because then you have to reduce the diameter of the flap. That's the most important thing, and go to a slightly deeper plane and then redock with that, because then you'll be sure that you're not going to get two planes while lifting the flap.
That's-
So the side cut is the important one. If you get it during the raster, you're still much safer, but during the side cut, then you have to be careful of those.
Have you ever had a position where they to abandon it and then take up next day or something?
No, I haven't had that
Like?
particular.
And whatever you, Dr. Bansal.
One of the patient we had the suction loss. The patient moved and the ring dislodged. So the flap was somewhere midway. So then we have to abandon the procedure and then plan that patient after about 2 to 3 months, and we did a PRK in that patient.
Oh, you did a PRK.
Yeah.
Can you repeat a microkeratom base?
Microkeratom can be repeated, but at a deeper level.
Yes.
You
Yeah,
should
I
not.
have done
Yes.
2-3 cases like
Yeah,
that.
but should not be at the same level, because you never know
Yeah,
that
yeah,
it
yeah.
will go at the same level. Especially it may be true for the fematosecond,
And
because
that's
the
what I'm
accurate-
thinking. Can you do it in
Yeah,
the
it is possible, but not in a microkeratom. Maybe you need to go for a deeper, or maybe surface ablation. These days, surface ablation is also working very well.
No.
So-
Suppose you have planned a 7 diopter or 8 diopter with a very thin plannable surface.
Then surface will be a better option, I think.
Surface will be better.
Yeah, because if with a high myopia, if we have,
Yes, actually, the minimum thickness difference between the first cut and the second cut should be at least about 20 to 30 microns. So if it is a 90 microns, you cannot make a 100 micron flap unless you are going into femto.
Okay.
So in a femto, yes, you can. But if you are going for again microkeratom based one, it has to be at least 20 to 30 micron difference. Now, if that is acceptable to the patient depending on the thickness of the cornea, then you can do it after 3 months. If not, then you plan for PRK. And of course, 2-3 things that I would be covering here, which are very important in doing PRK in a hair scenario, is how do you prevent haze?
Yeah,
If that can be
that's the
addressed,
reason.
then
I mean,
probably
any
can go-
refractive surgeon would like to comment on the flap-related problems, other than those small holes, or those are different. Anybody has? I mean, are they all budding refractive surgeon or in practice?
So one more point.
Yeah, I think he has a point.
Yeah, please go
Actually,
ahead.
I heard about the microstria management. So I just want to add upon, like, do you put some distilled water and try to swell up the
Yes,
flap
you-
and then to...
You can use hypertonic solutions
Yeah,
also
actually.
to.
It is a must.
Actually, it is a must. That's what
Yeah,
I believe.
yeah.
That was not stressed upon, I believe, in
Yeah,
your
that,
talk.
that
so-
is, you have to float up the flap. Without that, you can't really do anything.
Yeah, beside floating up, making it emitters
Swelling, yes.
will definitely help in ironing out those.
I actually prefer not to lift the flap first. I prefer to put distilled water, swell up the epithelium, scrape it off, then lift the flap.
Correct.
And my scraping is almost full amount of flap diameter. Then only it can straighten up. Otherwise, still have microstria again next day.
I think there's no need to be conservative with the epithelium and on if you're getting stri, so you have to kind of remove as much of the epithelium, and it works quite well if you do that.
Correct. And the other point which I want to ask is, like, suppose you have aborted the flap, then what is the minimum time lag you take for taking patient again for refractive procedure?
3
I
months.
think
3
3
months
months
is
is
ideal.
what the standard. I don't know. People
Yes,
can do
3
it before that also, but then I think to be on the safer side, It's
Yeah,
only the
actually-
problem is, how to counsel the patient, because the patient normally in a refractive surgery comes with a time bound. I am this holiday this way, I'm a professional, and it's very difficult.
You have to counsel because you have to admit that there was a mistake. You can tell it is your
Yeah.
mistake or a machine mistake.
Machine mistake.
But you have to tell, you cannot avoid. Secondly, you tell him or her that your vision is important or time is important. If you are interested to have good vision, you have to wait. The surface will modify, so you have to do a repeat keratometry, all these surface topography and all that, and do subsequently. So you cannot just do the next day or 3 days after,
Yeah, that's,
even if it's PRK.
Okay, yes.
Thank you. I think we'll go ahead with the more primitive or more advanced form of refractive surgery, which is PRK, surface ablation. I personally do not have too much of experience in this, but I have been given this topic to speak on. So it's basically the removing of surface epithelium and then treating with the refractive laser. It is called surface ablation. We have 3 types. One is the PRK, one is the laser ablation, streamlight, another is epiLASIK. And it was started in 1983, and then US FDA approval was given in 1996. There are various reasons why PRK is preferred. First and foremost is when the surgeon is not very comfortable about landing up in flap complication, he does prefer PRK. Sometimes patients also want, by Googling, that the PRK does not have flap related issues, so they want. Second is professions, where there are likelihood of flap dislocation in professional sportsmen, boxers, so they would prefer to have PRK done. When it is contraindicated in corneal surface disorders or thin corneas where you cannot do LASIK, so these are other indications. And most importantly now, retreatments, PRK is the option. And in these cases, when you do PRK, what is most important is how do you do epithelial debridement. That is the key. Whether you are doing it fast enough and how much less trauma you are giving. So we have 3 mechanisms. One is mechanical removal of the surface epithelium. In these patients, you have to put a lot of proparacaine so that the epithelium is loosened, and then use a blunt spatula to slowly scrape it off. It is a good technique in the sense that you do not use any chemicals and you would less likely traumatize the limbal cells, and the healing is supposed to be faster, but the problem is the inaccuracies in healing, in epithelial growth. So here, because you are allowing the stroma to dry up because it is taking longer time, so the chances of slow reepitheliation is also there. And then after this, the second method is when you use alcohol or any chemical to loosen the epithelium, and what is commonly used is alcohol, 20 to 30% alcohol that is put on the surface into an optical marker which is about 7 to 8 millimeters in diameter. Once the alcohol is kept inside for about 30 seconds or maybe 20 seconds depending, then you have to absorb it with a wax sponge and then lift it and flush it thoroughly. So this way you do not spill the excess alcohol onto the limbal stem cells, and once it loosens, peeling off is fairly easy. It can come out in few seconds. It doesn't take more than about 10 seconds or so to peel it off the epithelium part. So here, because it is fast, you do not allow the stroma to dry, and also the healing is rapid. The brush, which is Amolis brush, is basically used, which is a rotating brush, which is used to scrub off the epithelium. This is an animation where if you put the brush vertical onto the cornea, it will cause a uniform ablation of the surface, a uniform removal of the epithelium. But if you are not putting it perpendicular, then it is likely that you do not remove epithelium from the full area. It can be partial. So initially, I do not personally do not have any experience on that. The problem is once you put the brush in the front, the patient doesn't see. So you have to put an external light source on the other eye so that it is fixating centrally and the eye is not moving, and then you apply the brush keep on rotating till you go to the basement membrane level. So giving a external fixator is very essential when you are using a Amolis brush. The second method of removing epithelium is laser based. I think I can just fast forward a bit more. Yeah. So the laser scraping or transepithelial technique. There are two machines which have this. One is the EX500, which is called the Streamlight, and another is Schwinn machine where it is called transepithelial PRK. Process is same. You drape the patient, anesthetize the patient, put cold saline or cold BSS so that the patient has less pain, and then you do all the settings as you do for a PRK, except that you have to have an additional setting where you remove the epithelium, and the epithelial removal depends on the pre-operative evaluation of the corneal epithelial thickness by an intersegment OCT, and you can set about 45 to 60 microns thickness to remove the epithelium. In Streamlight, after the epithelium is removed, there is a gap for 2 to 3 seconds, and then again the PRK is completed, whereas in the transepithelial one, it is a continuous process. What is most important in PRK technique is the haze, corneal haze, and that causes not only poor visual outcome but also regression and patients' night vision issues. The mechanism is because of the formation of myofibroblast, which are induced by transforming growth factor beta, which are induced again because of delayed epithelial wound healing. So these are the main pathomechanism by which these myofibroblasts produce abnormal collagen fibers. So how do we prevent it? By proper patient selection. Do not choose patients who have any connective tissue disease. Do not do surgeries on a very high myope or a high hyperope, because in these cases there is always a delay in formation of the basement membrane. So delay in the basement membrane formation leads to more and more deposition of myofibroblasts. The other issues that are to be taken care of is how do we use medications. Usually the steroids are given for a long period, for a minimum period of 2 to 3 months. Start with a high dose and taper it slowly. Then you have to prevent by using mitomycin C on the table intraoperatively. About 20 to 30 seconds of application of mitomycin C on the ablated surface helps in reducing the formation of myofibroblast, and it was invented by Mr. Majumdar, Dr. Majumdar in 2000, after which it has been used all across the world to prevent PRK haze. So you can soak blotting paper of about 7 to 8 millimeter diameter and put it on the ablated surface for about 20 seconds to 40 seconds depending on the amount of ablation that has been done, and after that it has to be thoroughly washed and the surface covered with a bandage contact lens. I don't know, stopped. Why did it stop here? Stop? No. Okay. There have been other uses of Procara, which is a biological corneal bandage device which has amniotic membrane, and these can reduce corneal scars or haze post PRK. Drugs which are known to decrease myofibroblast proliferation. One of them is the plasma rich in growth factors, can be used. So, but there have been no specific drugs which have been introduced in the market. In case of very strong haze, you have to do a repeat PRK. You have to scrape off the unhealthy epithelium. Below the epithelium, either you can again scrape off the scar or do a repeat PTK. Here you can see the scar and we can try to scrape it off. At times the blade can scrape off the scar. If it is not possible, you can do a repeat PTK and polish the surface, remove the scar and again retreat with mitomycin C and complete the procedure. Okay, I think that is all regarding surface ablation and corneal haze prevention. Any issue, any discussion, anything which is coming into mind to be discussed, please feel forward to.
Excuse me, sir. I had a.
Yeah, anybody has any questions? Yeah, please.
Any experience of iritis post surface ablation? Anybody over here? And the cause, if anybody has any, so far.
I personally have not done too many PRKs, so whatever I have done, I have not had a single case of iritis, no inflammation. Initially, my initial few cases where I was not able to clean the alcohol properly, there was delay in epithelial healing. So the bandage contact lens was to be kept for 5 to 7 days. But subsequently, once I learned to clean it properly, absorb the epithelium, absorb the alcohol and then wash it, healing occurs normally in 3 to 5 days maximum. No incidence of inflammation.
Anybody?
Did you
Yeah.
encounter one?
Yeah, like several cases, I need to report, I haven't reported yet, but I have come across several cases of iritis post surface ablation, at least 3 to 4 in my 10 years of practice. And it is not a early onset, it's always a late onset. And that is something which I need to find out from the literature or from my seniors and my colleagues. What is the reason behind it and how to prevent it and what to do about it. Although it goes off with time, but there has been cases, at least 4 cases, 3 to 4 cases I have seen in my practice.
And all the
Many
4 cases
of-
that you have seen do not have any autoimmune diseases in
No,
them.
no
They haven't screened properly.
autoimmune disease, and the healing for the first week went all right. The same presentation in all the cases. So this is something I'm trying to find out the answer to it.
Sometime herpes eye disease has to be ruled out
Okay.
preoperatively
Okay.
because that is known if the patient has missed, if the patient has some little bit pigmentation on the posterior corneal surface or had some episode of herpetic keratitis, they are the ones who get this.
Okay.
Yeah, so that needs to be ruled out.
Thank you.
But are there any, refractive guidelines or the corneal thickness guidelines that you follow in your practice where you do PRK and these cases you will do a flap base?
Yeah,
And
that
you-
is a main requirement, I think.
Yeah.
For LASIK minimum, we go for 500 microns,
no,
and then we calculate the depth,
Yeah.
how much depth we are left
But
over.
is there any refractive, the refractive, how much, 1 diopter, 2 diopter? Do you
for
follow
PRK?
it? For LASIK, where you won't do LASIK, where you would do PRK, other than the corneal thickness?
LASIK from 0.5 you can do
Yeah.
absolutely okay.
So
PRK, it is not wise to do beyond 4 because of the chances of haze. But
you
though
have
people are
lot
going
of
up to
lot
7.
of people going for services who would be tested, and especially army and all, where they don't want any LASIK mark to be there or anything. And do you advocate PRK in those?
Yeah. I think morning there was a session where they were talking about PRK revisited in a way that they call it ASA, Advanced Surface Ablation,
Yeah.
which is mainly transepithelial TPRK.
Yeah.
And if you have that machine which can do trans PRK, then chances of epithelial problems and epithelial haze are much less. So I think with the newer people are again going towards the PRK. That's what the morning session people are talking about.
I think
it.
that's the new
But-
machine. That's the new.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
new machine-
my only concern is they are all
Haze.
saying it's fine. No, it's not haze. Haze, it's fairly good to be. My only concern is whether the surface epithelium which grows back very regular. If it doesn't become regular and you are doing it for a person who would like to join Army 6/6 vision,
It's quality of the vision.
yes. So you might land up with a 0.5 residual cylinder because of the irregular corneal surface regrowth. Okay, you can have epithelial hypertrophy in these cases. So you have to have ample time, and by ample time it means it may be 3 months to 6 months.
Before you.
One more thing, keloids, patients with a tendency to keloids, then you
You have
have
to
to avoid
Yes.
this. And I think the NN group was talking about using AccuVail to reduce post-operative pain.
That I do
BCLs
always.
soaked
They are
in-
also saying about a role of vitamin D3 to decrease pain, and of course omega-3 fatty
Vitamin-
acids to decrease scarring.
Vitamin D is obviously controversial because everyone is deficient, but yeah, that has been published to have a role as well.
Now I invite Dr. Ajay Pal to speak on refractive lens exchange.
I think we needed 2 more subjects to be finished before I would have touched that. But then Dr. Sonu is still not here because he's gone for his lunch, and then he is to do the lenticle base and the phakic IOL. And that's why this is the last option. This is not basically refractive, but if you are a refractive surgeon, you have to have this also. I mean, patients of all age would come that I want spectacle-free life. It could be somebody between from 10, 12, 15. Well, definitely the consensus is that you do it after 18 or 19 or when the refraction has stabilized. But it could be as late as 45, 50, 55 that they would still want to be. And this is the option where you would know how does it differ from a normal cataract surgery. Now I would be talking about it. Something's wrong with this every time. Yeah, so I'll be speaking on this. Well, what are my choices for my criteria for choosing a patient for RLE? Well, definitely the refractive status, patient's age, the corneal thickness, and the lenticular abnormalities, if at all that is present. I'll be just showing a femto cataract removal or femto lens removal in the background. So for me, the LASIK, as I said, LASIK or advanced PRK option is anybody between 18 to 50 years, 0 to 8 diopter of myopia. This is the broad heading, no corneal or lenticular abnormalities as far as the thickness or the residual bed thickness is there. There's no contraindication, or there is adequate corneal thickness. Now, these are definitely my first choice for guiding the patient to undergo LASIK. Or for me, the phakic IOL is any myop over the age of, this is where I would advise, or above 5 diopter of myopia with thinner corneas. And if above 8 diopter, if you have thicker cornea, definitely LASIK would be my first choice. And the age would definitely also be a factor. But when it comes to refractive lens exchange, any myop over the age of 50 years with inadequate corneal thickness. Now remember, inadequate corneal thickness for any corneal-based procedure, if the patient is there or if the person is there for, again this, and any hyperope of, this is the hyper of any age above 4 diopter, and especially those who are above 45-year-old. Now again, I would again avoid, even for hypermetropics, doing at a younger age, or younger age anisometropes, which cannot be corrected. I mean, below 50 or below 45 would be my choice, or shallow AC in high hypermetropia, where even a phakic lens or anything that I would like to give, that is not possible. So that is one of the options that I have. Well, so you have a limited choice, and definitely presence of water vacuoles in the crystalline lens above the age of 40. Now that is where I would not go for a phakic IOL. So RLE to be compared, again, I think. Excuse me, I think something wrong with the connector. Yeah. this is a... Now, to be compared to a refractive surgery, now the visual quality and the accommodation has to be maintained. There is induced, so difficulties of IOL choices are there. If you want to say whether it is similar to RLE, difficulties of IOL choice are there, predictability of post-operative refraction is there, induced residual astigmatism if you are doing a lens-based, removing the lens and putting in, and the biggest fear is obviously the retinal detachment, loss of contrast sensitivity, and posterior capsule opacification. Now these PCO and then subsequently YAG, and we know the chances of retinal detachment increases once you do in these high myopes. So in spite of doing all the possible preoperative checkup and preoperative, all the, the lasers or whatever you do, all the corrections of the retinal holes or retinal holes, in the presence of frank holes or presence of history of retinal detachment in the families, definitely I would not go for RLE in this young age. Also, I think it's still giving. It's there in this. इसमें नहीं है, इसमें है, इसमें नहीं है.
Very warm welcome to this vast course. I'll be talking on the small incision lenticule extraction, the SMILE surgeries. We all know that the laser refractive surgery can be basically classified into surface ablation, LASIK, and SMILE. So what essentially we are using in a VisuMax platform is 0.3 micron energy with a 500 kilohertz system. So no flap complications as you see in your LASIK procedure, the microstria, the flap dislocations, the epithelial ingrowth. So essentially it boils down to a lenticule cut with a side cut, the flap cut, and a flap side cut. So the patient is taken under topical anesthesia. The patient is docked under VisuMax. It's a very gentle docking. The patient can visualize this green blinking light. And you see the first cut, this is the lenticule cut. It goes from periphery to central. This is if you see the side cut, and then the cut, this is the flap cut which moves radially across. And then you have a 2.5 millimeter, the flap side cut. Just gently note, I go in and I'm trying, this is the gas bubble sign. Dr. Sri Ganesh has come up with a study. This shows an adequate femtolaser being applied. So I'm trying to create two planes, one plane above the lenticule and the other plane below. So I first go beneath, try to separate 360 degree. With the newer software, the system is very smooth. It takes just movements both ways and it gives a very easy separation. This is, then I try to create a small hook here. So this gives me a point of anchorage. I go on the right side, try to do a clean sweep there, and then come at the end and try to separate this. Go inside, put in the BSS and gently wash this off. Just note again, so as I move in, this becomes, the whiteness goes off. So this is the gas bubble sign, and this indicates that the femtolaser energy which has been applied, the settings have been appropriate and just appropriate to give you a very adequate smooth dissection. So watch again, I go separate onto the left side, I go again separate onto the right side. That's a 360 degree separation now. I go underneath and this is the flap, underneath the flap, and then there is a small bridge that I have left on my left side, and then finally I clear this bridge again, go in, push in small BSS, and it gives you a hydro expression. So yes, SMILE has certain advantages. It gives you a more biomechanical stable cornea as compared to the LASIK. So we all know that the anterior 1/3 of the cornea is where the collagen fibers are the strongest, and the nerves, minimum cutting of the nerves 28 millimeters vis-a-vis 2.5 millimeters. So this gives me patient who doesn't complain of dryness, and to my mind it gives me a more biomechanical stable cornea. Now we know that between the different stages of surgery there can be certain complications. So the suction loss to me is the biggest complication that we encountered in our initial cases, but yes, these are all amenable. Black spots could be because of the mebumin secretions, the dirt fibers, the ink used, and they might cause difficulty in tissue separation. So let's begin. Now this is some nightmares that I'm sharing with you, but believe me, all the patients go back and recover. So this is the basic lenticule cut, and it extended more than 10% but less than 90%. So you can't do anything, go off and take the patient for a LASIK or a femtoflap. Now watch carefully. This is again a cut, and the lenticule side cut partially, and the patient squeezes and I lose the suction. So at this stage you can redock the patient. So what I do is take the patient back, redock. So watch very carefully. This is the side cut. So it begins from the side cut, again the flap, and then the flap side cut, and you're back to your own stage where you can give excellent results even in an uncooperative patient. So counseling preoperatively is very, very essential in all these patients, and specifically patients with deep-seated eyes, patients who are over anxious, patients who are a typical type A personality. You need to sit with them, counsel, because those 15 seconds of laser application is very critical, and the suction loss can sometimes cause problems. So this is the hook or the anchorage which I break, and then just go in and it separates very easily. Now watch carefully. This is the lenticule cut, the lenticule side cut, and see the conjunctiva starts bloating. I start apprehending of losing vacuum. My foot pedal is on, but before anything could happen, there is a suction loss. And now this is a stage where the machine would automatically give you what stage you need to begin. So it's a very smart system. You redock the patient, maybe you can clear the central the gas and redock the patient, and watch carefully. The moment I redock, this is the side cut, the flap side cut, which didn't happen. So it restarts 0.5 millimeter inside. So I again open up. Now this has to be done very carefully because you have to identify these two planes, and then very gently you can separate the lenticule. So even if the odds of the conditions, SMILE is very forgiving, and redocking of the patient can be done most of the times, except if you cross 10% of the lenticule cut before the side cuts. Sometimes you can have a flap which has been separated from one side, so you can again go in between and try to separate, because retained lenticule can again be very, very annoying. So here you see the lenticule has not been fully separated, so I grasp and very slowly, like a Rexis, you can rexes away the lenticule. Watch carefully now. There's the lenticule cut. See the conjunctiva starts bloating, 12 o'clock. The side cut. And there's the flap cut. So before the flap side cut could happen, the vacuum loss occurred. So I need to clear the central gas bubbles, redock the patient. So that is what I am doing here. And then it begins from the flap cut and then the flap side cut. If you would have watched carefully, even in the second stage, the patient did a zap movement. So where the flap cut couldn't happen properly, so I had just this nearly 1.8 or 2 millimeter incision through which I'm trying to fashion away the lenticule. But believe me, the separation is so smooth that once the plane is identified, you can easily separate the lenticules. So this is the anchor which I have created. On the left side, roll completely, separate, and then come back, separate, and then do a gentle visco or the hydro expression. And this is the post-op, immediate post-op picture. So even after 24 hours, you can't even make out whether the patient has been operated. Thank you.
I think you can take a break and let him complete. We can probably take up a few questions on SMILE in case any one of you have any question on SMILE. Yeah.
What is your energy offset for the 4 stages of SMILE? Do you keep it constant, or do you change it based on the pachymetry, or is it like standard, like for all cases it's standard?
So as of now, it's by default. We have kept it at the factory settings. So it's same for all the 4 stages. But yes, a lot of work is now being done where we are trying to define the difference in energy between the lenticule cut and the flap cut. And I think that basically aims at minimizing the use of energy. So that would give you a good tissue dissection, at the same time taking away the energy. So with minimum energy, the best possible tissue dissection. So even Dr. Sri Ganesh Center, he's been working on reducing the energy used for the lenticule cut as against the flap cuts.
Thing, in the suction loss, I saw like none of your the second docking that you did, none of them had a central marking. So how do you ensure that the docking is right in the center?
Correct. So if the patient is cooperative, and the patient can really focus into those the light where you are asking to focus, the green light here. So you can actually dock it, and with your experience, you actually know where you are docking, because you did the initial docking on the first go, so you know how much eccentric or how much central to the pupil you were. And once the patient is cooperative, you can really ask the patient to look into the fixation light and be at the very center of this. But yes, that's a great idea. For initial cases, you should always mark the center of the cornea and then only redock, or initially when you're beginning, right from beginning, you should mark the center of the cornea. And that holds true for all kind of refractive surgeries.
Yeah, to continue from where I had left, well, because of this some technical glitch. So myopic RLE we are talking about is the instability of capsular bag. That's the problem. The increased risk of PCR. Myopes, there is a increase of the intraoperative or subchoroidal hemorrhage. There is always a risk. And capsular block syndrome. Now this is the intraoperative risk that you have. To remember that in a hyperopic, definitely a shallow entry because you are cramped up for a small space, choroidal effusion, the malignant glaucoma can be at some time. So before taking this procedure, counsel the patient that you could, it's not easy go and just go, and the incidence of RD as high as 10%. Now this is something you should remember. I mean, the reason why RLE was not accepted, all this widely accepted as a form of refractive anxiety is the risk of RLE, but today with this higher machines and machines which you have a control of the internal milieu, whether the anterior chamber, the fluctuations, you can keep it down. Definitely it's one of your choice in armamentarium, but to definitely lower the risk of CME or lower the risk of RD, if you have a total control of the surgery, we'll come to that. So increased risk of RDs with the younger age, male patients, any axial length more than 27 millimeter, presence of PCR and having a YAG capsule to be done immediately after surgery. So again, PCR is something, I mean, you can never predict, but I think you're still having that problem, huh? Even video pen drive, I think we put it in this system. I think it's in the, so capsular X-ray. Let's come to the surgery proper. This is a high myopic patient where the axial length is around 28.5 and we are putting around -3 diopter of lens. Now look at this patient. So this is a high myop patient. Now very important that you have that capsular rhexis right in the center. Remember, this is a clear lens. Rhexis should be as central as possible, as the round, around 5 to 5.5 millimeter. 5 millimeter is what I would suggest, because if you look at, this is a hypermetropic eye where 21 diopter axial length, we are planning to do 21 diopter with the 29 diopter lens. Now, rhexis marker is something you can be handy if you are not having femto in your setup. So you have the right, now this is very important, that why you should have specifically for RLEs, the right rhexis, the right central, because any shift of the lens over a period of time would invite early PCO, and then you have to do YAG, and then the risk of retinal detachment. So if you can prolong the YAG capsulotomy or the PCOs in early stage as late as possible, because this some with the advanced technology lenses, the chances of PCOs are less. And again, nucleus removal. Now this is a deep anterior chamber. You have to be proficient enough. The machine should be such that you can remove the lens with minimal of damage. I mean, the techniques that you would do for a high myope, it could be chip and flip or a cartwheel technique, as I've seen, but then always keep the anterior chamber intact. Never let the anterior chamber go down, because that fluctuation is the one which will induce PVD and chance of retinal detachment. Here we're doing a hypermetropic eye, as you can see that one. This is a around 52-year-old gentleman, has early lentil sclerosis, as you can see. I'm trying to do it IOP 30, and I've fixed the this vacuum around 600, but still I'm feeling some, fluctuation. The anterior chamber is too, tight, so I've increased the IOP to 30 to 40, and that's where I'm getting a better control. As you can see, this lens with the aspiration rate of 20, if you can get the hold of it, you as will know that it needs a bit of learning stage to, learning curve is there while we are using this Centurion machine with this IOP control. But then if you can get a good hold and good control, definitely and see the minimal fluctuation that I am trying to, though hypermetropic, it may not matter, but in myopes it's very important. The fluctuation in the anterior chamber should be kept as minimal as possible. Once you remove that, and the choice of bimanual irrigation and aspiration. Now this is what, again, do a good capsular polishing, remove it bimanual, where at no point you are losing your anterior chamber. As you can see, orange or a peel method, go from the periphery, come to the center, and do a good capsular polish. If you have got a IA system where you have got those serrated tips, and biometry is again so important in these cases. I think it's gone blank again. No, there's no signal. Cable. इस साइड का केबल So advanced technology IOLs, the biometry, as I said, I think we have the little bit, not discussed in detail here, but definitely Barrett's formula is something we do. SRKT is something which I do it for my normal cases, but Barrett's universal with the IOL Master 700 and the keratometer with the best possible the IOL Master 700 does. Along with that, a manual keratometry is also added, or use the Pentacam. Now, when you are doing infusion lead, but because this is high myopic, lens might oval a bit, but see that your lens is directly central, well placed, and there is a margin of anterior axis. Now, since being a high myopic, as you can see, in spite of having almost 5 millimeter axis, you can see it sees that it seems that the lens is covered, but remember this lens would come forward over in the post-operative period, immediately after post-operative. So this coverage would be enough, or the anterior shrink effect would be enough. In case of well formed, now femto laser is one of the options that you have, because here you can actually have a well round central capsular axis, and if you have a variant in your disposal or any of the marking systems which are there, that would, perfect, because these are the patients at the age of 50 or 55 would want to be rid of glasses. You are putting an advanced technology lens, so if you have in your disposal, and as you can see the soft cataract, you can just dissect it, and most of the time you struggle with the soft cataract in most of the machines, but with the visco dissection with the 6 cut, it becomes easier to remove those soft cataracts, which would be, most of the time you'd struggle to get a hold with your machine, but then those small, and then the marker system, as you can see, in this case we'd be putting I think it was a Symphony toric lens. As you can see, the marking, the manual marking is so commensurating with the marking of the variant. I think it's 105 degree, and that almost tallies with the manual marking that we have. So you have a double check in both the manual and the variant system that's there. And putting the lens right, yes, this is again in a multifocal lens. You have that variant marker where you have got a central 2-3 circles which should tally on the central part. The reflex that you see should be in the central part, and that would give you a better control. As you are placing this lens, you can rotate it under infusion. At no point have I allowed the anterior chamber to become shallow or lose the anterior chamber or lose the fluctuation in the anterior chamber. There I just placed that lens. This is a Symphony toric lens, just tallying with the, so one has to be perfect in these patients, demanding patients who would be definitely ready to pay you, but then at the same time would want a perfect result. So that if you look at the studies in support of that, there's almost 100% improvement of uncorrected visual evidence, 75% of improvement in best corrective visual vision. And this is the myopic study. Myopic RLE study says the RLE was predictable up to 87.5% and within 1 diopter, and 95% within 2 diopter. In hyperops, surprisingly, you would find a lesser prediction, 88% in low hyperops within 1 diopter in the target, and 58% within 1 diopter because the hyperop biometry, I suppose, is not to the mark, and many a times hyperops are not that happy, because if you have a vision with the plus 12 lens that is seeing 6/6, many a times with the lens you would, because of the hyperops have a magnified image. Once you put in a lens, the size or the size increase, but the patient is used to that. So what would be around 6/18 or 6/12? The myops, the opposite happen. Even if they have pre-operative around 6/12 or 6/12 partial and all, it definitely increases up to 6/6 or 6/5 if you have because of the minification effect that they had with that myopic lens, and we put in a lens that the satisfaction level is definitely higher with the minor. So in conclusion, it's not for every patient. Considering refractive surgery, you have got a steep subset of patient. It's elective intraocular surgery that needs to be minimally invasive, performed with precision and high accuracy. That's what I said, that if you have enough of experience removing your cataract, removing your over a period of time. You have got enough of experience that on your machine that you can perform, and you have the least PCO rate. I mean, it's very difficult to say what my PCR rate, but especially in high hypermetropia or high cataract with high myopia or cataract with high hypermetropia, once you have done that, definitely these are the patients that you would counsel to get under refractive lens exchange with the presence of refractive error in the absence of cataract. Now that's a tough, but with the risk-benefit ratio in mind, depending on the age or refractive condition or preoperative condition, proper counseling, definitely the main challenge involved would be to reach emmetropia. But with those modern machines and modern lenses, with the rapid recovery, with astigmatically neutral incisions, this can be done with greater predictability today than it was done, say, 10 years back. So today, definitely it can be one of your armamentarium in your refractive surgery. Thank you for your patient here.
Thank you, Dr. Ajay Pal. Yes, I am sure with the improvement in the quality of surgeries and the predictability of the outcome, this is again resurging back. But we still have to be very, very cautious in our patient selection. Any of us who have any queries on refractive lens exchange? Before we go on to the last topic of today's session? So, no, you can.
So in refractive lens exchange, we are mostly talking about axial lens which are more than 26 and 27. So do you think the Van Gogh adjustment has a, do you use that in your biometry to calculate the IOL power, or it's only?
Right now I am using Universal 2, Barrett Universal 2. It's there in my IOL Master 700. So I mean, we have been having it for quite some time now. So that gives me the best result. And I'm anyway in high myopes, whatever I always target for, because it's very important that you target not emmetropia, a bit myopic, so that because most of these patients, you'd not like that anywhere you go wrong with the best of technology that we have, even that Wang, the modification that you, in spite of that, there have been reports that you do have. So for myopes, anyway, I would, for these high myopes, aim around -1, so that patients are quite happy with that, for the range of near vision that they have.
And for second question, for a younger patient, say like around who's maybe 30, 40 years old, you would prefer a Symphony, or you would like to go for a trifocal?
Yeah, see,
Or maybe a Symphony or
over a
multifocal.
period of time, I've realized myopes, they do better with a Symphony lens, any high myop, or and because of the refractive, because myopes are used to a wide range of vision. A hypermetrop is a very specific, a little bit here and there. So trifocal would be what I would prefer for a hypermetrop, but for a myop, definitely a Symphony or Symphony Toric as.
Thank you.
I think, but very rightly you said that accurate biometry is what is very important when you're using either a Symphony or a trifocal lenses.
Yeah, we need to actually do two things. One is use at least two or more type of formula to find out that the biometry is more accurate and the lens power is similar. And the second is both eyes has to be done together.
So for people who have not been using ICLs, so let's have something to begin with. So this is how ICL patient who walks to us, a probable candidate. Now an ideal candidate for me would be a patient who has a clear cornea, age more than 18, no systemic illnesses, no connective tissue disorders, a very stable refractive error. So the patient is taken up for scan, and the most important in ICL patient is sizing. So sizing, I mean calculation of the anterior chamber depth, a white to white. I do a UPM, an angle assessment, gonioscopy, an OCT, and a specular count in all our patients. Now, when you're taking a patient for ICL, so the two parameters which are the most important is the anterior chamber depth and the white to white. Now, anterior chamber depth, for me, the gold standard would be a pentacam or optical biometer, either a 500, IL Master 500 or a 700. I would take readings from both the equipments and try to correlate. The endothelial cell density is again very important depending upon the age and the anterior chamber depth. Nothing below this should be addressed when you're taking a patient for ICL surgery. So this is what we do, a white to white with an IL master as well as the anterior chamber depth. And so I address the patient to both a 700 and a pentacam. So once the sizing has been done and accurate calculation has been done, the patient is taken under topical anesthesia. Now what is more important is the loading of the lens. So this is how the bottle is supplied by the manufacturers. This is a soft tip cannula. You never touch or you never hold or never grab with an instrument. It is this soft tip which drags the ICL, and believe me, the optic is the most delicate part. The center is the most delicate. So this is the specialized cartridge. Put in a drop of HPMC, put in the ICL and gradually tap the ICL in such a way that you create a U-shaped fold and both the sides are anchored either ways. Ensure that all the three holes are in a line. So if the three holes are in line, you would never have an ICL rolling the reverse. So these are specialized crocodile forceps. Grab in your right hand, push it from the nozzle. So this is the reverse when you're doing a loading of a cataract, an IUL. Grab the ICL and you can do it either ways. You can either pull your left hand, keeping your right hand stable, or you can withdraw the ICL inside the nozzle. Once you see the ICL inside the nozzle, again ensure that all the three holes are in line. This is the specialized the injector being supplied by the manufacturers, no proprietary interest. The ICL is a Star proprietary, and we have our own Indian manufacturers manufacturing the IPCL from both the Biotech and the IOCare. Both are equally good. So the soft tip cannula is plunged inside the injector, and this is the cartridge which is then loaded from the front side. Put in a drop of again an HPMC and then lock it. And then you have to hold in such a fashion that the thumb has to apply the force with both the index and the middle finger holding, and never push the ICL with the wound assisted mode of entry. So the incision size is very important. I would always aim for a size somewhere between 2.8 and 3. I have an access to the Callisto and the Virion both. So under topical anesthesia, make 2 side port entries, 1.1. I would always do a 3mm incision because I feel that is the most comfortable size where you don't have the chamber going shallow. And viscoelastic choice could be of 2 types. You can use either an HPMC or a sodium hyaluronate. I think both have an equal surgeon preference. For me, HPMC works well. So when you are inserting, you have to be very, very careful that you don't touch either on top the endothelium and below the lens epithelium. So watch carefully. I put in the injector. The cartridge is within the wound, and very slowly with the tapping action, my eye is always on the 3 holes: the front, the middle and beneath, the trailing. So if the 3 holes lie in the same plane and they open up always in a horizontal plane, never shoot towards the sulcus, always shoot on the iris. Now this is the specialized manipulator. Grab the haptic and slowly clockwise and anti-clockwise direction, you can push it underneath the iris. Be very gentle when you are pushing this. You can use a magnification of the microscope and then do the trailing plate at the last. I use the main port here. You can use either of the side ports depending upon your hand convenience. Before washing the viscoelastic, the lens has to be kept in the right position. If it's a toric IUL, you can either use a Mendes or you can use an automated or a markerless device, be it a Callisto or a Virion. So this is the Callisto, gives me the right axis, bang on. The last step is the viscoelastic wash. An adequate viscoelastic wash is a must in all ICL surgeries because retained viscoelastic is the biggest cause of day 1 rise in intraocular pressure. The wound is then stitched. Either ways, you do a hydro sealing of the wounds and the patient can enjoy good vision. So watch very carefully. The ICL goes in. I want you to see the 3 holes which I am talking about. You can see the front, you can see the middle hole, you can see the line of the toric, and all 3 are in a single line. You will never have the ICL going the reverse direction. go in, push in the viscoelastic on top of the ICL to create a space between the endothelium and the ICL so that you can easily manipulate and nudge these plates underneath the iris. And then you can gently wash away the viscoelastic. So I think ICL surgery is a great boon by which we all cataract surgeons can transform into great refractive surgery. In China now we have only ICL clinics where people just have an access to a microscope and they have transformed themselves to great refractive surgeons without an Excimer or Visumax, the costly equipments. Now watch carefully. Very initial cases, the ICL goes in and I'm not giving any heed to the way it opens up, and then I release and it opens up reverse. Don't panic. Push in viscoelastic, take back your crocodile forceps, just grab the plate and the junction of the ICL. Just look what I'm doing and gently pull away through your same 3mm incision. Believe me, the Collamer is a very soft material and it comes out very easily. The way it goes, it comes out easily. So even if you have an ICL moving in the reverse way, you can easily pull out the ICL, reload, and you can re-push the ICL in the same direction. In the paucity of time, I have a huge library here of the nightmares. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sonu. We can just take a single question before we end the session. We are already post our time. Any questions? Okay, yeah.
Any experience for cleaning the visco using a coaxial rather than a bimanual or a Simcoe? I've seen surgeons doing it with Simcoe as well. But don't you think it causes more endothelial cell loss as compared to doing it either with a bimanual or a coaxial?
See, I agree. There has been a lot of debate about using a coaxial, a bimanual, and I've seen people doing, even in live surgeries, using Simcoe cannulas. Yeah. So I think what works best in your hand is the way to go for it. Because at the end of the day, there is not much of endothelial loss which has been reported by simply doing away with viscoelastic by either of the ways. So I think what works best and the safest is the way to go. Now people have shifted from visco insertions to BSS insertions. So let's see what the world has to say. But I think at the end of the day, the viscoelastic, the take home is that the viscoelastic has to be washed thoroughly.
I think with a larger wound, like here the wound size is 3.2 millimeters, using a coaxial will be difficult. Because when you put coaxial, the lot of fluid will come out from the wound only. Because coaxials are either 2.8 or 2.2 millimeter, depending upon your phaco requirements, whether you are using 2.2 millimeter or you are using 2.8. Here the main port size is bigger. So using a coaxial will be more difficult because a lot of the fluid will flow out through the wound itself, which will make the anterior chamber shallow, and maybe the endothelial, what you are talking may be true, that endothelial cell loss may be little more if you are using a coaxial because of the shallowness of the anterior chamber which occurs with the coaxial.
And a lot of times you have the iris also coming from the main wound.
Yeah, then you have a problem
so
with the
you
iris
have chaffing also.
So unless you have a coaxial cannula rightly made for the wound size, that cannot be used.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I thank all the speakers here. I can hand over the vast session to Retina.